taking a look at the third module, which I have entitled A Being Towards Death or A Being Beyond Death. Let me try to explain that title. The being towards death comes from an idea from Heidegger, Martin Heidegger, who you'll be introduced to in this module. The notion of a being beyond death is my own way of characterizing the disagreement and the response to Heidegger's idea from Paul Landsberg, which is where the excerpts from the experience of death is from. We need to start with the idea of a being towards death. And I think the best way to start is by looking at this clip from the 1980 movie, My Dinner with Andre, in which one of the characters, Wallace Shawn, mentions in response to what his friend Andre is saying, his idea of what Heidegger was getting at in his idea of being towards death. And I really can't think of a better capsule explanation of that idea than what that Wallace Shawn gives in this scene, which is a wonderful scene from a wonderful film, which is really a philosophical film. It's people talking about their lives, but in talking about your life, you talk about your ideas and what you believe. You can't just, you comment on your life, you evaluate your life, you interpret your life. You don't just say what happened in your life. That would be weird. You try to assess the significance of it. And in assessing the significance of what's happened in your life, you're being philosophical. So in any case, this is a great film, and what he has to say about Heidegger's idea of death. I'm not a Heidegger scholar, but it seems pretty good to me. And perhaps to get a little more of an idea, because Heidegger is really not something we want to try to read in this course, but we want to get the idea. Take a look at Simon Critchley's popular account of Heidegger's idea of death as being a death in his great work, Being in Time. We don't want to get too far into Heidegger, but for various reasons. But the basic idea is that the human being is a finite being. That is, that you and I and everything else that is alive and exists and is conscious is inexorably heading towards our own death. And on a broad level, which is all I can really talk about, Heidegger is on a broad level. The recognition of that truth, that we are finite beings, that we are temporal beings whose lives are unfolding in time, but not in any kind of perpetual and open-ended way, which was certainly, let's say, the perspective that was given to us by, let's say, a Plato, or in the Bhagavad Gita, what Krishna has to say in the Bhagavad Gita. Heidegger's idea, as I take it, is that death is an absolute end. That is, it's Epicurean. It's from Epicurus, or similar to Epicurus, the notion of death as the absolute termination end of our existence. But he takes something quite different from that than Epicurus did. I think from Epicurus's view, once we realize the true nature of death, we realize that there's no reason to think about it because it's nothing to us. Existentialism, a term that could be applied to Heidegger, is an existentialist philosopher, rather is interested in exploring the implications of that consciousness of our finitude, of our upcoming end, to actually how we live our lives. And the general idea, yes, as Critchley says here, if our being is finite, right here, in the beginning of this lesson, if our being is finite, then an authentic human life can only be found by confronting finitude and trying to make a meaning out of the fact of our death. But it's that beginning of confronting our finitude. I'm not going to try to ascribe all these ideas to Heidegger, but generally speaking, the existentialist view is that any belief in an afterlife of any sort is an evasion of the truth. That is, any belief that the human being survives in some form, in some open-ended, immortal way, is a denial of death. denial of the reality of death. The reality of death is pretty much what Epicurus said it was. It's the absolute end of our existence permanently and as a whole. So our task in life, or part of our task in life, is to confront this, which means to accept it. Otherwise, we would, in a certain sense, be living in a dream world of some sort. Now, what we have to acknowledge is that, as Wally Shawn says, every moment of our lives is we're getting one moment closer to our end. That is, we are a being towards death. An inanimate object, a book, a cell phone, is just sitting there and is not really going towards anything. Where you and I are going towards something. We're heading towards something. We're unfolding in time, and that unfolding is a finite, temporary sort of thing. Unless we can accept that, we can't hope to really live in truth. I think that's what the idea of an authentic life is. A life where we are aware of, conscious of the reality of our condition, and in which we have dealt with it to a certain extent. We have assimilated that knowledge, and there's a certain liberatory promise there. I'm sure that many people who are deeply into Heidegger would have problems with much of what I said, but this is not a Heidegger course. So we're getting what ideas we think are important. So if we move on to Paul Landsberg, unfortunately, very brief excerpts from a long essay he wrote called The Experience of Death. I've just taken out what I think is absolutely essential to see: his criticism of Heidegger, his denial of Heidegger's idea of human existence as a being towards death. And I hope that these excerpts, however brief, do explain my formulation of his philosophy as a being beyond death. Now, the first thing he says here is that the specifically human problem of death is created by the transformation of a living being into person. I'm going to stop there and make another video about Landsberg, because I have to say he's one of my favorite philosophers, and so I have quite a bit to say about him. So we'll leave that for the next video.